Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that everyone's keeping safe in this weather if you're here in Oregon or Portland. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tracy Gagnon, the Community Food Systems Developer for the Oregon Food Bank. And one of the goals of our statewide network team is to support food systems advocates across the state of Oregon through our Feast Leadership Network. And one of the ways we support this network is through these quarterly webinars on topics you've said you'd like to learn more about. After our last webinar on healthcare partnerships, there was resounding interest in the topic of equity. It's a big topic to unpack, but we put together what we hope is a good primer into how Oregon Food Bank is thinking about equity. We're in the beginning of our journey, and we very much hope we can learn together as we all continue to grow in this work. So before we get started, we ask that you please keep yourself muted to minimize background noise. And if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. I will also be communicating with you through that venue. And this is also the place where you'll be adding questions for our Q&A section at the end. This webinar will be recorded and made available on our website. It usually takes us about a week to get that up on our site. So I'm going to go ahead and advance our slide here. So here's a quick look at our agenda. We'll begin with some definitions and basics. We'll review our OFB timeline and journey. From there, we'll take a look at our equity lens. And from there, we'll talk about how it's informed our policy work. We'll hear from someone who has used equity in their food pantry. And then we'll have time for question and answer at the end. I'm going to go ahead and start with our bios of our speakers. Bear with me, there are a few of them, and I'm honored to introduce them. And once I've read all of their bios, we'll go ahead and get started. So it is with pleasure to introduce Court Morse. She joins the Oregon Food Bank team as a Community Equity Coordinator with over 10 years of organizing and community action experience. A native of Wisconsin, Court came out to Oregon to attend Portland State University. There, she worked with the Oregon Student Association as student body president. She's had the opportunity since to run numerous political and human rights campaigns focusing on the environment, higher education, racial and LGBT justice, and immigrant and refugee rights, primarily here in Oregon. Court is enrolled with the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of the Chippewa Indians, the Ojibwa, and the Anishinaabe, and goes by she or they pronouns. Our next speaker will be Megan Newell-Ching. She's worked for the Oregon Food Bank since 2007 in various capacities, including her current role as Associate Director of Partnerships and Programs for Oregon Food Bank's branches. Megan is passionate about ending hunger in Oregon and about involving as many people in the process as possible. In addition to her work at Oregon Food Bank, Megan has served 2 terms on the board of the Portland Fruit Tree Project, a local gleaning organization. She lives in Gardens in North Portland with her husband, Matt, a fellow anti-hunger activist, and her children, Abraham and Vivian, who help her see the world through fresh eyes every day. When not working for a good cause, she enjoys running and her absolute favorite sport, baking. Nicole Forbes is our community engagement developer with the Oregon Food Bank. She has been organizing and developing leaders and volunteers for environmental groups, labor unions, and election campaigns for the last 9 years. At the Oregon Food Bank, Nicole works to bring together advocacy work and volunteers to help ensure that policies are passed at local, state, and federal levels to eliminate hunger and its root causes. And I'm very excited to introduce Linda Dove. She has been the pastoral director at Bethlehem House of Bread since July 2013 and has been on the staff of Tigard United Methodist Church since July 2008. She has worked for more than 40 years in United Methodist, Episcopal, and Catholic parishes. Linda is a graduate of Marylhurst University, where her multidiscipline degree combined religious studies, human studies, and art. Her grad level work in educational leadership was also done at Marylhurst. She was trained as a spiritual director at Shalom Prayer Center in Mount Angel and as a labyrinth facilitator at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. Linda brings passion, people skills, and a sense of calling to the Bethlehem House of Bread Ministries. She feels fortunate to be a part of a community that is helping to feed people, body, mind, and spirit. She believes that all people are of sacred worth and feels blessed to provide leadership in a setting where relationships are being built and lives are transformed. So again, I just want to make sure that folks are muting their mics. I heard some background sound, so I just wanted to please have that request go out. So Court, you're up. You could unmic yourself and bring us some basics.
Awesome. Well, hey everyone, thanks so much for attending this call. I promise we'll probably generate more questions for you than answer them, but we're really humbled and honored to share out this work. It's really critical, it's really urgent, and we're happy to share with everyone how we're approaching it and as Tracy said, learn from what you all are working with as well. I just want to talk briefly about these terms of equity because a lot of them kind of jumble up and they sometimes seem interchangeable, but there's a huge difference in our approach to the work, which is the difference between equality versus equity. One second, please give me some feedback.
Stop for a second. Someone's got their mic.
There we go.
On. Okay, that's better.
Someone was chiming in. So equality is the concept that all of the folks experiencing hunger should get the same services and programs, and that is really the end line of our work. And equity is really the concept that there are different reasons that people are experiencing hunger, and our role is to meet them specifically where they're at. So just in a sort of simple way of putting it, if someone was hungry for 3 days and got one slice of pizza, and someone would just ate breakfast and also got one slice of pizza, maybe that might not be the best approach to ending hunger on that same level, but rather the person who's been pretty hungry having multiple slices of pizza. If I can get the next slide. So this is just a visual way to represent that not all of the folks that we work with are going to absolutely need the same food at the same location in the same way. And again, we're really examining our role in taking that second step to tailor the ways in which people need food assistance. Next slide, please. And a lot of this really goes along with some of the foundational work that we've been building, often called root cause work of hunger. That really, a lot of us take that broader approach, that we're not just giving away food boxes, that we're really looking at the reason that people need them in the first place. So if we already subscribe to this philosophy of root cause work, that really means that we need to beg the question of how did people end up needing food in the first place. And so that's really some of the different words. You might hear equity or equality. Again, equity is our value as an organization, and so it's really important to identify what is your value as an organization. How do you approach ending hunger? And then equity really does fall in line with that and is sort of a next generational step for a lot of the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. So this is just a bunch of numbers on a page. It'll get prettier and visual in the next few slides. But if we ask the question about why are people hungry, and we look at those experiencing hunger, there's just simple data that can't be ignored. So for here you see that nationally speaking, almost 3 out of 4 people experiencing hunger are folks of color. And in Oregon, we're growing that number every day. The communities of color, by a certain point, will be almost 40% of Oregon's population. And if you look at some of, again, lots of numbers, but if you look at the data here, we see that folks of color are experiencing poverty at higher rates. So here in Oregon, 1 in 3 folks of color are in poverty. And so when we beg the question of what makes people hungry, we have to look at who's hungriest. And then it's really, like I said, this data that you can't ignore to know that there are really concrete reasons that general poverty has created this situation for folks of color. And I'm totally going to say the R word in this equity webinar, which is racism, and the ways that generational poverty has really been passed along. So, whether we're looking at systems and barriers to education and all of those different institutions, or whether we're just looking at the data, we can't ignore that folks of color are still experiencing poverty at much higher rates. Next slide, please. So again, there's pictures that sort of break it down. Here again, we see the fact of 3 out of 4 people nationally experiencing hunger are folks of color. Next slide, please. And then, as I was talking about, this is the growth rate of folks of color. So for folks that are saying, you know, we can't do this work, or we don't have the capacity, which is, you know, we're always feeling pinched, but I think there's a huge case around our changing demographics and the need to really adjust and approach the work to make sure that we're closing that gap if we see that folks are experiencing hunger at higher levels. Next slide, please. And again, this is facts I've already broken down, but in every pretty much economic indicator, we're seeing people of color almost double experiencing poverty, hunger, and we see that particularly a pinch for newcomers, which is another term for immigrants or refugees, one that's a little bit more welcoming, so I like to use it. But we have 1 in 5 folks in Portland, for example, that are foreign-born, and we're seeing a lot of our newcomers showing up at our agencies and sites. And so not only is it hard being someone new to this country, but additionally, even if you're a person of color, you're experiencing double hardship. Next slide, please. So, you know, again, the equity is a really big topic, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we started to digest that. But for our foundational work, I wanted to start with those facts because, again, there's simply no ignoring the communities that are showing up who are experiencing hunger. There's no ignoring the way generational poverty has stacked the cards against certain communities. And so we just wanted to honor that and explain that, you know, in our root cause work, that's what we're seeking to address and figure out the most strategic way to end hunger for everyone. And when we talk about equity and food for everyone, we have to acknowledge those things. And again, equity being that word that defines our approach. I'm going to punt it over to my colleague, Megan Newell-Ching, who was really before me at the Oregon Food Bank doing a lot of the equity work to talk about how we started that journey.
Hi all, this is Megan. So I've been at the Oregon Food Bank for almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years in a couple weeks here. And I would say that the way that we came to begin to really talk more about equity, both in our approach to working with each other internally at our organization, as well as to our working with the folks at our community, was kind of an organic process. I think that particularly when we had a change of leadership with our CEO about 4 or 5 years ago when Susanna Morgan started with us, we were having some internal culture issues with staff, and folks were bringing up a desire to see more diversity among our staff, and that came up. And at the same time, we were starting to hear a lot from the community about you know, some of the indicators that Court just talked about, that communities of color were experiencing hunger at different rates, that we should think about partnering more with culturally specific service providers. So it's kind of a combination of both staff coming together and coming to leadership and saying, hey, this is something we're interested in working on and learning more about, as well as folks from our community coming directly to us and saying, hey, this is something to pay attention to. And I think in terms of how we approach particularly the work in the community, it's not changing necessarily what is our primary focus, which is that we're a food bank and we bring food in and we move food out into the community, but it's really putting a different lens on that work. And so it's thinking about who we work with as partners and what kinds of food we are soliciting and providing. I think our produce initiative over the last 3 years has really been a primary tool in our equity work, because produce is something that is a culturally appropriate food for almost any culture. So it's not really changing the work that we do. We're still a food bank. We still bring food in and move food out into the community, but it's really putting this different lens on how we do that work and who we do it with and how we're thinking about it and how we're talking about it.
Thanks, Megan. Next slide, please. Great. Previous one, rather. Thank you. So I just really wanted to honor that, you know, I'm sort of a newcomer in the food banking world, and really appreciate the foundation that was laid, and how, you know, that it is a journey, and it did take some time to get at a place where we're really able to be where we are now. So just a quick snapshot of the timeline. Really we had a full day, several day in-depth training with staff that Megan was mentioning was a part of our work. And it's really important that the right trainings happen for staff. So often we'll hear from our folks or partner agency folks that we want a training, and we don't really know which training to have, but we know we need to have this conversation. And so, again, it's really important to find the right training that's going to talk about how folks ended up in poverty and talk about the different communities that we're seeing and why some of those reasons occur. But it really got to the heart of the history of our country and why we're still seeing these, very huge gaps in communities. So that I would just recommend that was really the catalyst of how we got here. And then we really built out the work, so we asked staff to volunteer, to sign up, to become a part of these equity teams. We have subcommittees and equity teams currently that are really picking up the work and helping us build it. My position, the Community Equity Coordinator, is a FTE position that the Oregon Food Bank said it absolutely wanted to invest in to help create and add more capacity in addition to some of the staff that are already doing this equity work at the food bank. And then we really built out an organizational assessment. So there's different tools out there to assess your organization and kind of give you some sort of guiding light on where to get started. We use the toolkit for the Coalition of Communities of Color put out a protocol for culturally responsive organizations. That was a lot of words. I can send that out, but it's essentially a toolkit that measures your organization, everything from, is equity in your job description to do your clients have a way to give you feedback, and really just kind of breaks down a lot more of some of these specific metrics. And so next up around the corner, now that we've really elevated and add a little bit more detail and specifics, we're really hoping to now bring clients to the food bank and building out a client advisory board to ensure that clients' voice is at the center of what we're doing, which is another way that the Oregon Food Bank really expresses equity is through that client voice and engagement. And then essentially we want to put together an equity plan that involves all of these different stakeholders. Next slide. I'm a little bit over time, so I'm going to just briefly maybe answer one or two of the questions that were submitted around pre-questions that folks put out, so thank you so much for that. One of the questions was how to translate these big goals into practice and how can you measure your progress over time. I mentioned the toolkit for coalitions of communities of color, which has again, 9 domains with maybe 15 questions each, so it's a lot of thinking and deep diving, but you can also just get started with asking people what they already think equity looks like and how you would brainstorm a big list to measure your organization upon, and that can include everything from how diverse is your staff team to your partner agencies, how many languages are available. So some of those things can just be, your own personal brainstorm. So I'll punt it over to the next speaker and hopefully answer some more questions later in the presentation.
Okay, so that's back over to me, I think. Go ahead, Tracy. We're on the right track.
You are on the right track. I just wanted to ask that someone has their mic on, and it's really distracting. If you could go ahead, if everyone could go ahead and look and make sure that their mics are turned off, that would be really helpful. And Megan, you are up. I'm having some funky technical things on my end, but I will get the slides back in order.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I think this dovetails nicely with the question that Court was just talking about, which is how do you take big goals and translate them into sort of smaller bite-sized pieces or everyday action. One thing that we have been working on as a staff is figuring out what some of the tools are to help us do that. And one of the tools that we've been working with is an equity lens. Tracy, can you move to the next slide? So an equity lens is it's a filter or a tool that really is to help in planning and decision making or resource allocation. And ideally, this tool will help us and can help other organizations that use similar tools move towards more racially equitable policies, program delivery, and hopefully more equitable outcomes for our clients. So what is an equity lens? It's really just a set of reflective questions and processes that can function for individual decisions or team-level decisions and also for organizational-level decisions. And it really just kind of pokes at, have we included all the right folks? Are we bringing in awareness to who we are, who's in the room, who's not in the room, what our biases are, what we're bringing to this decision? And then can also help clarify the goal or the action that's being taken. So what are we hoping to get out of this? And why are we doing it? And how are we going to do it? So it's a tool that can be used in the everyday to sort of begin to take action on equity. Tracy, can you move to the next slide, please? So our purpose, so at Oregon Food Bank, what we looked at some other tools like this and came up with our own tool that we're just beginning to use. So we're about 2 years out from those staff trainings that Court talked about. It's been almost 2 years. It was 2 springs ago that we began this process as a staff. And we just now have finalized our equity lens and are really beginning to use it more often in our work. And so the purpose of the tool at Oregon Food Bank is to help create some protocols and clear accountability structures to ensure that we're making progress not only towards our goal around ending hunger in Oregon and Southwest Washington, but also in a more inclusive work culture. And so we hope that by using this tool, we'll have more equitable decisions, not only for our staff, but also for the communities that we serve. Next slide. This slide shows the questions. These are the top-level questions on the lens. The lens itself is about a 4-page tool. That includes some definitions of terms, some suggestions for how to use it and how to structure a conversation around using it. But these are the top-level questions that we ask. So when we're making a decision, and then there's some sub-questions under each of these. So essentially, if you're in a team meeting and you're trying to decide, well, should we put a community basket site in this neighborhood or not? Then we can ask ourselves these questions. And the idea is that it begins to become more of a habit and more of practice for folks, and so that they're routinely checking with themselves. What are we hoping to achieve? Have we intentionally involved some folks, including stakeholders, those people who are going to be impacted by this program or this decision or this budget? And then checking our own beliefs and biases. Who am I? Well, I'm a parent, so am I bringing the bias of like, well, this program doesn't work for families, so I don't think it's a good idea? Or I'm a upper middle class white woman, so what does that mean about what I'm bringing to the decision? Just asking ourselves directly, does the decision advance or racial equity or not? And then thinking also about the communication around when we make decisions. Who do we need to talk to? How are we going to share this information? What is the timeline? That kind of thing. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our process. Like I said, it's been about 2 years since we started our intensive staff equity work. And so Court also mentioned our E-team, our equity team, which is a staff cross-team committee. It has folks from every department. So once we kind of identified that we needed this tool, we formed a subgroup, and folks who are interested in working on creating a tool specifically for Oregon Food Bank. We looked at some equity frameworks and tools from other organizations. Multnomah County has a great one if you're looking for examples, or if folks have other questions about organizations. We looked at a lot of different ones from this region. We came up with a draft for our OFB tool, and last spring and summer, we piloted it with a number of teams. So folks who are on that sub-work group went and visited with different teams, our communications team, some of our partnerships and agency relations teams, and tried it out on decisions. And then based on those pilot conversations, we revised the tool. And currently we're rolling it out to staff, so we have a finalized version of the tool. And one of the things that our subcommittee is working on is really making the tool ubiquitous within our organization. So for example, we have copies of it that we've laminated and put in every conference room so that it's right there in front of folks when they're having meetings. And we have it on a shared drive on our server. We have it in a lot of different places, as well as that folks from that subcommittee are making themselves available to facilitate initial conversations. If folks are not quite sure how to use the tool, we'll come to your team meeting and sort of help walk people through it. So those are some of the things we're trying to do to make this tool useful and used by our staff. I think that's the last slide. Yeah, on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Megan. Nicole, you.
Great.
All right.
Great. Can you hear me okay, Tracy?
Yep, I can. You sound good.
Great. Excellent. Again, hi, I'm Nicole. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator with the Advocacy Department here at the Oregon Food Bank. We're just going to spend some time talking about how we've started to involve more equity work here at the Oregon Food Bank and our department specifically. I'm also just going to be talking about policies that the Oregon Food Bank itself has endorsed, which are sometimes inclusive but sometimes separate from those that are endorsed by the Oregon Food Bank Network. So I just want to make that very clear. We're only talking about the Oregon Food Bank itself as we talk about these policies. So next slide, please, Tracy. So why do we work on things outside of policy? The Oregon Food Bank has routinely done it in an informal way through clients and through agencies, and taking in that information, and through a more formal project, through our Voices project, which is a story project that we have and run across the state, where we collect stories and get input into what we should be working on from that. And we hear a lot of different things about why folks are coming into the food bank. Folks are working full-time, but can't make ends meet. They can't get enough hours. Folks are unhoused. Folks are students or have other debt, healthcare debt, payday lending debt, education debt, or just other expenses like housing are rising, and food takes the cut. So we like to take a look at the Oregon Food Bank, as Court talked earlier, about what are those root causes about why folks are coming into the food bank. And yes, we need to expand and make sure our programs reach every hungry person here in Oregon. But what are the policy solutions for the folks that are coming into the food bank, either at the state level in Salem at our capital, or at the federal level? And then when we're advocating for it, I like to think is, how do we make the connection back to food, either for our volunteers, or how do we make the connection back to our clients when we're advocating for different policies across the state? So next slide, please. What have we worked on outside of food policies? The top, I would say, 5, 6 are policies that we, through our informal way of collecting stories and doing outreach, we advocated for, and specifically on transportation and affordable housing. Those are policies that have really been affected as we started to think more about equity in the last couple of years. So we've supported a minimum wage increase here in Oregon, through a board endorsement and through a small way through the Oregon legislative process. We've supported an emergency housing fund so that folks can stay in their homes, payday lending, fee caps, temporary assistance to needy family program. Here in the state, we watch to make sure that that block grant is distributed correctly across the state. We've advocated for an earned income tax credit for folks who qualify for that. And then on transportation, and then I'll dive a lot into affordable housing. On transportation, because of our equity work, we currently sit on a TriMet equity subcommittee to discuss TriMet's transit policies and the effects of those policies on our clients. And then we've dove deeply this year because of our equity work into affordable housing coalition and bond work here in Portland. And next slide, please. We dove into the affordable housing work because we took a look at we used the Equity Lens Toolkit. We realized as we went through the Equity Lens Toolkit and that process that we were getting much more anecdotal, I guess you could say, feedback from agencies and through our Voices project. But it had been a while since we'd actually done a client input survey and said, are we missing something? Is there something that we are missing from the stories that we're hearing? Is there a more formalized way we could do it? And so we did a client input survey this last spring in 2016 and decided to involve our clients directly into our work. This created some obvious solutions that came out of it, but we asked a series of 2 questions for folks, and then the first question could be either, if you were the governor of Oregon, what changes would you make to help folks in your community, or if you're running for elected office, what would your top priority be and why? And the second question was either what challenges are present in this community for which there are currently little or no help, or what could improve your situation and make food assistance less necessary for your family. And so affordable housing became the very, very top thing on that list, which took us for a little bit by surprise. Because of the rate of homelessness here in the Portland metro area, and then again, affordability of housing, that our rents are too high, that folks are getting rent increases, and so we should have rent caps, and that there should be more availability of low-income housing. Obviously, folks came to us with that SNAP amounts are not sufficient. And then another thing that came up when we talked about jobs in the economy was access to job opportunities, job availability, and transportation to those jobs that are available, and the distances that folks have to go in order to get to work, and the fact that we need higher wages and a higher minimum wage. Surprisingly, medical costs and access to medical insurance was the last of the priorities we saw, and I think mainly that has to do with the Affordable Care Act, and so we're sort of on pins and needles as far as that goes moving forward. There was a really great question in the registration that was about how do we address low-paid labor and a need for immigration reform when we talk about equity in our food system. And we approach that in a couple of different ways at the Oregon Food Bank. One would be through our work on minimum wage. One is making sure that citizenship is not a barrier for folks who receive our services and the policies we move forward to. But the other question, I think, as we move forward and continue to do this through our equity work is, are we actually creating a space when we do this client survey or in a survey that we do in the future that would actually leave space for this type of issue, like immigration or another issue that's not directly related to the pantry itself? Are we leaving room for that space? And so that question actually triggered me. As we move forward, are we leaving room for spaces for folks to bring up immigration and to bring up other issues that are on their minds but might not be the forefront? And so we're still continuing to work on that in our work moving forward. Next slide. And so I really wanted to delve deep because of this client input survey and because of the immediate need for affordable housing that came out of that survey. While we were involved previously with an affordable housing coalition here in Portland called Welcome Home, as a direct result of that client input survey, we were able to step up in 2016 to have a more active role in our Yes for Affordable Homes campaign. So the Oregon Food Bank moved forward and decided to dedicate half of my time, plus more of that as election day got closer, to work on the campaign directly. That we involved our staff with phone banks in the campaign. We completed 48 phone bank shifts overall, or 10% of the phone banking shifts of the campaign. And we did a lot of volunteer engagement of the volunteers that come in for folks for repack shifts. We talked about the campaign at repack shifts. We asked folks who are Portlanders to sign pledges to vote. We got over 150 of those in person or through our emails to our volunteers and activist network. And then we also had a prominent display in our hallway with information about the campaign. And really the only reason we stepped up in such a big way on this campaign was because of the equity lens work that we did and because of the client survey that we did. So it had having and will continue to have a big impact on our advocacy work moving forward. I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Nicole. Really appreciate it. And Linda, you are up. Are you there?
Okay, I just took my mute off. Is this fine?
Yes, we can hear you. Go on ahead. Thank you.
Okay, good. Good. Hi, all. This is Linda Dove, and I'm Pastoral Director at Bethlehem House of Bread. Court invited me to talk for a few minutes about the climate in our pantry. We've been open for about 3 years, and I think that the climate that's developed during that time has been shaped and informed by our mission statement and our welcoming statement. So first of all, I just wanted to take a minute to share those with you. From the beginning, our mission has been to feed those who are hungry in both body and spirit at a table where all are welcome, emphasis on the word all. In keeping with our mission statement, our welcoming statement seeks to clarify that notion that all really does mean all. So I believe it's there on your screen if you're using a computer, but I'll read it for those of you who don't have a screen. Our Bethlehem House of Bread community is enriched and strengthened by the uniqueness of each person and the wonderful variety of our humanity. We welcome people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. We welcome people of all races and ethnicities. We welcome people regardless of age, class, economic status, health, ability, or any other identifying label. We believe that meeting people where they are, sharing stories, building relationships, forming community, and offering hope happen best when inclusivity and mutual respect are allowed free rein. And I truly think that at Bethlehem, that inclusivity and respect are oftentimes more implicit than explicit. I think it's a part of who we are and who we are becoming at our Bethlehem community as it grows. Our leaders and volunteers are committed to being open and to practicing that hospitality that we talk about. So then what does our pantry client look like under that kind of philosophy? Well, we strive to have a physical environment that speaks to that. Our pantry space is clean and organized in such a way that it seems less like a pantry and more like a small grocery store filled with lots of choices. We have a small international section and a small special diet section, and we're working on trying to grow both of those areas and the choices that are available in them. We also have a whole second room in our annex that's filled with fruits and veggies. Both of these spaces have a lot of window and natural light that allow people a view of our gardens. We also post posters and photos around the building that speak of peace and inclusivity. Many of our clients have a lot of chaos going on in their lives, and they say that they appreciate coming to a place that feels peaceful and open. Some of our clients have told us that they've been to other pantries where they've felt judged and or disrespected, and they don't choose to go to those pantries anymore. The fact that they've had to make that kind of choice is a cause of great sadness and concern to me. Our volunteers spend quality time with each shopper. We come to know each by name, and we are learning each other's stories. There are always lots of shared tears, smiles, and hugs in our pantry. Like most pantries, we do have pantry guidelines, but we try to keep them very flexible because we believe that every person in every household has unique needs, and we want to respect that. Our waiting area can get crowded, but it allows clients a place to sit and form relationships with those around them. We also have a recipe wall, a little free library, and a big free store where people can shop if they want while they wait for their turn to shop the pantry. We have a community garden where people can walk and enjoy the outside spaces, that is when the weather allows. I know some of our pantries who say they can't get enough folks to volunteer, and I wonder, have they looked at the people resources that they have around them? Our clients are actually among our volunteers. Our volunteer pool is very inclusive. It represents young and old, rich and poor, gay and straight, and a variety of races and ethnicities from places such as the U.S., Europe, Africa, India, Guatemala, Pakistan, Mexico, and Jamaica, to name just a few. Some of our volunteers have homes, but some are homeless. Some have addiction issues, and some don't. Some have very little education, and some have undergrad and or advanced degrees. Some of our volunteers come to us as interns from the alternative high school programs that we also house in our building. And some of our volunteers come to us from community groups and organizations who hear about the work we do and just want to be a part of it. Volunteers are definitely our lifeblood, and we love all of them. Court has visited us a few times, and we'll be working with her in the coming months toward involving more of our pantry families in leadership roles at Bethlehem and for Oregon Food Bank. We also plan to increase our involvement in advocacy work this year. So we're far from perfect at BHOB. We've made our share of mistakes, but as we go into the future, and as we're feeding those who are hungry in body and spirit, we will continue to work more and more towards meeting people where they are and towards offering that hospitality to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. That was beautiful. Really appreciated you calling in to share that with us. And now I'm going to pass it on back to Court.
I just want to say, Linda, thank you again. That's where our equity work really comes to life. And so, a food bank is a big ship, as I'm reminded. And where we're trying to steer it, it's so many partners. It's our clients, it's our partner agencies, it's the network, it's folks who donate to us, it's folks who experience hunger. And really, it's important that all those collective voices are absolutely at the table when we're having this really big conversation around equity. So I just am so humbled by the work that Linda does and how she brings that equity to life at our partner agency site. So thanks so much for joining us today. I just want to talk quickly about questions to ask when getting started that have helped us. Equity work is a really big thing, and often, sometimes, and actually in all cases, it creates more work, but it's important to, do what you can with the resources that you have, but also to ask yourself some further questions to try to avoid any pitfalls when beginning your equity work. So the first question, and the question that I actually had for the Oregon Food Bank when I joined the staff was, what is our investment level? Is it really deep right now? Is it that we're curious about it? What is the right next step for our equity work? Because again, the equity work is really rich, it's really meaningful, it's really deep, and it has, a lot of feelings that come with it. And so it's important that, you understand as an organization, where are you ready to invest on staff time, on trainings, resources, and money that it takes to do equity work. Again, what's the goal? Is it to just have, more diverse voices, or is it to end hunger most strategically, or to really involve communities of color? What's your end goal in equity? For us, and for all of you, it's to end hunger and to really understand who's hungriest. And so our goals are often measured on how successful we are as if we're ending hunger for those most vulnerable populations. How will you create benchmarks for your organization so that the goals aren't too lofty, too far off? They don't really make sense to a lot of folks. With our work here at the Oregon Food Bank, we did a full staff meeting on equity, and we really broke up different teams, and we asked each team to come up with concepts on how their team would apply equity. And it really is across the board. It matters who we hire. It matters what kind of food we're distributing. Often our truck drivers will make split decisions on which produce to drop off where, depending on the population and if that food is culturally responsive. So, really, there's a lot of different measurements you can use, everything from what kind of food you source to, how many languages, to these really big goals of how do we end hunger for communities of color. So there's a lot of different metrics out there, and the point is that you again measure it in one way that allows your organization to celebrate when it's moving forward and to really pinpoint those benchmarks. Another question is, how is race currently discussed and experienced in your workplace? Is it okay to say that word? How are folks feeling about it? And again, really just being curious and starting to foster that conversation is really important. Often I'll find that we're afraid to have these conversations, that we're worried about how people react. But the point of the matter is it's on everyone's mind, and a lot of people are absolutely willing to talk about it and want to. So, but that is a marker for your organization. What are your organizational values and culture around talking about race? Because again, that data is right in front of us, and so we have to be able to talk about why communities of color are almost double experiencing those hardships, right? So we want to make sure, though, that we're at a place where our organization is ready to have some of those conversations. And then the question is, how do we do internal stuff or do we do external stuff? A lot of my work is how do we bring in communities of color and organizations that serve communities of color. But sometimes the work is really starting at home first to elevate that equity conversation and then bring in new partners so that we're at some better playing field to really understand each other. So a lot of our equity work started at the Oregon Food Bank to make sure we're ready to go before we bring in those clients, before we bring in a lot of those organizations. And then what's at the core for concrete improvements? That's how I measure success, is how will our client talk about our equity work? And did we give more food, to folks that are experiencing hunger? And did we give the right food that tastes like home? And how are we closing that gap that society has placed on certain populations, whether you're disabled, whether you're a veteran, whether you're a member of the transgender community or communities of color? Again, how are we really meeting folks where they're at and why they're experiencing hunger? Because in the end of the day, we want to make sure that our equity work is targeted to have the most impact for our clients and keeping our clients at the center of our work, as opposed to doing equity for the sake of equity. And so we want to make sure that those measurements are really in place to have those concrete improvements in the lives of our clients. So those are just some basic questions to ask, but those are some of the primers that I think are really important to have really frank conversations with leadership team, with partner agencies, with clients about, are we ready to go there? Because you want to make sure you have enough resources and that the culture is at the right moment. And you also don't want to hesitate to make sure that you're becoming more effective in your work. I think that's all I have for that slide, Tracy.
Thank you very much. I just had a funky thing happen with my slides, but I will move to the next one. Hopefully everyone can see that. So we're essentially at our Q&A section right now. So now's a great time to chat any questions you have into the chat box. And as those are coming in, I asked Court if she wouldn't mind taking some time to answer a couple questions that came in from registration, just to give people time right now to type in those questions that you may have. So Court, if there are any other answers you have to questions from registration that you'd be willing to go into now, this would be a great time as people are typing in other questions.
Yeah, let me answer one of the easier ones, and then I'll give the harder one to my colleague. But I wanted to, there was about 10 questions or so that we got beforehand. One was, what are the most successful ways to promote equity? I find that oftentimes that vulnerability in these conversations is the most powerful thing, because it's really asking everyone to come to the table and to share something that might be hard for them to talk about. But once we start the conversation, it's really powerful to see who comes out of the woodwork and who really cares about equity. And we find that we often have a lot more bond with our colleagues, our clients, than we thought we did, right? So I think one of the best ways to promote equity is to start having just more conversation. We have a Noodle post at the Oregon Food Bank that's an internal server place that we can put, we can post stories of equity, we can share articles, we can say something that matters to us, we can promote community events that we're organizing. We're calling it our marketplace now. And we just wanted to elevate that sort of conversation at the Oregon Food Bank, to be able to have agency to talk about equity in the workplace. I tell everyone in my trainings, it's hard to leave your humanity at the door, and often we're asking communities of color and other folks to leave their other identities at the door, and that's just not how we're going to be most effective in this work. So really giving people the opportunity to cook together, if you have the place, to talk about their cultural backgrounds, to have the conversation, it has been really, really helpful in our momentum. So that's one way to promote equity. The other, again, is in projects like Voices, which really elevate the story of color and other folks experiencing insecurities. So I just wanted to, I guess, answer that by saying, we ideally we're wrapping up our public equity statement here, and we're going to produce the equity plan, and there might be some fancy ribbon cutting, but often, equity conversations and how you promote it is really just in what's on your agenda and how do you create those kind of spaces among staff. And then I wanted to punt it to Megan to talk about some of the ways that we identify food insecure communities, and some of the work that's been done to identify underrepresented communities in our partnerships and programs work. So the question is, what are some best practices of identifying food insecure communities, and how do you create networks in those areas? So Megan, if you wouldn't mind tackling that for a second.
Yeah, hi. So I think we look to data, and in this presentation you've seen data presented in a number of different ways, but we're just looking at not only this, what we're hearing in terms of quantitative and qualitative data from our partners in our region. How many people are they serving? Is it going up and down? Who are they seeing? How often? But also, we look at data that's coming from other places, like the American Community Survey, the census, from Feeding America. We look at the Map the Meal Gap data and food insecurity data that comes from the USDA. So we're kind of trying to look across a number of different sources, and also in the metro area now, we're beginning to have some usable data from our using Link to Feed software, which is a client intake platform that we're using to collect service statistics as well as some demographic information from clients at some of our partner agencies. So we're kind of looking across all of that and saying, okay, what's going on in our region? Who's hungry? Who's where are there changes or whatnot in this data? And then when we went about trying to look at what are the most underserved communities in our region, we asked some additional narrowing questions. So we were saying, okay, among these groups, like, there's a lot of folks who could be considered underserved, but who is experiencing the most acute need and perhaps might have additional barriers to receiving federal nutrition programs like SNAP, whether those be physical barriers, cultural barriers, religious barriers. What about, some of those other things that are going on for folks? So that helped us to kind of narrow more who might be experiencing the most acute need. And then once we identified some groups that felt like the most underserved, we're just starting on this now in the metro area, but we've started to try and seek out leaders from those communities and organizations that already work with those populations. So for example, one of the groups we identified in the Portland metro area was immigrants and refugees. And so we went to community groups that were working directly with those populations and said, hey, tell us more about what's going on and how we can help. And then from there began to talk about partnership. Or if partnership wasn't the thing that made sense, like how could we as the food bank facilitate folks getting more access to food, whether that be through SNAP outreach or through just informing them about our existing partner agencies, or whether it meant looking towards forming a specific type of partnership or program to serve that population. So really, I think it's looking at data, and then are there any narrowing questions or additional barriers you might want to think about, and then really reaching out to folks in that community and folks who are working directly with folks in that community to see how we can become involved. Hopefully that's a good answer to that question.
I give it 2 thumbs up. This is Court. There was one more question, well, a few more, and please prompt any further ones. I'm going to answer one that came through and then one that was pre-submitted. But one of them was, how do we do an equity lens when it comes to development and fundraising? Oftentimes, we make assumptions about our donor base that prevent us from doing equity, when really we just haven't had that sort of foundational period of starting the conversation. And so our donors are just as diverse as we are, but that also is the hardest point at which to ask people to move along with our organization, is that that nervousness around funding and who funds us and who has money, etc. So I wanted to address that because that's a really big issue when it comes to equity work. I think the first thing is to definitely start the conversation with donors, to start exploring what other issues they give to. And that's just an open, sort of ended conversation to understand more about the donors that we do have, to identify a group of people that give to hunger issues, but also give to equity and diversity issues, so that we can start to develop a leadership group of donors that are willing to talk to other donors about why they think equity is an issue affecting hunger, and why it is they give to that, to really encourage other donors to support the Oregon Food Bank and your organization in this equity work. So I think the conversation is really just open-ended, and we need to start warming up our donors to these conversations, and really talking about why when you give us your dollars and we're doing equity work, we're being double impactful, because we're trying to really tackle insecurity at the core. And if we know that communities of color are double experiencing hunger, there's really a case to be made for that work. Another point is that there is a lot of funds out there for equity work, particularly organizations that are doing equity startups. And so while we want to make sure that we have enough of a bite into our work before we ask for money, there's often a lot of organizations and funders that are willing to give us those sorts of funds, so that in case we do take a hit on some donors that may not be ready to move with us on equity, we're also starting to develop a profile of donors that are super into equity. And then finally, I'll recommend that, in any equity work, in any new program, and anything that we do, it's really helpful to have those spokespeople that can talk about why they give to us, why they trust in us to take this adventure, why it's important to end hunger with those experiencing it the most, etc., to really just make sure that we have those champions in line to talk about the work and be able to talk donor to donor on some of those elements. And then the visuals that we use when we talk about who's experiencing hunger really matter, and the stories, there's just nothing more authentic than talking to folks about why they're experiencing hunger. And if we elevate the voices of those experiencing it the most, it's done in an authentic way that really touches people. There's just no price you can put on that. So I think when we understand more about each other, it really breaks down some of those barriers, because we see each other as humans experiencing hunger. So ensuring that our communications and marketing team is really using those stories. So that's one of the questions that came up, was around fundraising and development. But I want to see, Tracy, if you want us to wrap up.
I have one question that came in, and I think that would probably best go to Linda and Court. And I know, Linda, that you're going to be kind of on the beginning end of this. If you don't feel comfortable answering this super in depth, that's absolutely fine. But one question that came in is, she wrote, one of the presenters mentioned bringing client families into leadership roles. I'd be curious to know more about this type of work involving clients in leadership, advocacy, etc. So that may actually include Nicole as well. But Linda, if you wanted to start us off, if you felt comfortable, that would be great.
Well, excuse me, as you said, I think it's probably more of a question that Court can answer, but I've had conversations with Court, and she's come out and actually had some preliminary conversations with some of our clients about whether or not they might want to be a part of that. And so at this point, we're just kind of in a holding pattern and waiting for Court to move us forward.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, I think a lot of our partner agencies are already implementing client leadership in volunteer roles and decisions, which is really beautiful to see, and that's, I think, why Linda is an expert and why I've chosen her site as one of our anchor sites. But essentially, one of the ways that we're building that work out in the Oregon Food Bank is through the Client Advisory Board, which will mean asking leadership that's already engaged at their pantry sites, and then also building client leadership to really ensure that we have expertise on why people are hungry and how they got to that point and what they feel like the Oregon Food Bank should be doing about it. You know, and these are some really big questions that we're going to ask clients to weigh in on, and it needs to be handled in a delicate manner where we honor that those clients are experts in hunger. You know, they know why they got there. They know how to be resourceful. They know how to figure it out. And so our goal is to make sure that that information informs the way that we do our work, right? So it's going to take a long time to build that trust with client base, and and a lot of our partner agencies are already doing it. Clients who are part of the leadership teams or the volunteer teams are basically running the show, or feel safe enough to tell their partner agencies what they need. What we hope to build that at the Oregon Food Bank and really make sure that there's a structure by which clients can have a very official voice in how we approach the work.
This is Nicole. In terms of advocacy work, we continue to engage our voices participants in our legislative action days when Senator Merkley has a town hall and that type of work. The thing that we are, I guess, still in the process of building out over the long term is how often do we do client input surveys and get that feedback into our advocacy work? How do we continue to share those stories? How do we continue to use resources like Link to Feed that Megan mentioned earlier? How do we get a question inserted into that? We actually did that recently around the federal payday loan, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau payday loan regulations. So I get a little wonky here on a Tuesday. And discovered that more folks were having issues with payday loans and trying to develop stories from clients through Link to Feed. And so we'll be experimenting through just different ways and hopefully through this client engagement board of how do we continue to receive input into our advocacy work to make sure that we're not missing an issue or where we need to dive deeper into an issue. So we are still working out how we continue to gather that input in advocacy, but are going to continue to do as much as we can to the best of our ability over the next couple of years to make sure that those voices continue to be heard.
Hey, Nicole, there's a follow-up question that's coming in about funding. Did you receive funding? Did Oregon Food Bank receive funding to do the advocacy work? Or how was that? Was it general fund? Was it sort of in kind? How did that work?
Oh, for the direct time to do it. So. And for all of our advocacy work, so we just have an entire department of folks funded. That's a really great question in terms of how it's funded. I believe that some of it is grants and a lot of it is general fund work. And we've decided because of the priority in terms of the, I guess you could say our effort put in has gotten a lot of resources back to the Oregon Food Bank. And in federal work and in national work. My time specifically on the election campaign was a budgetary decision that was made and a resource decision that was made within our department and the funds that we had available to us for the year. And so it's been more of how do we set the priorities for the work that we do, that we're given through general funds. I would assume that there would be some sort of foundation work in there, but I'm not entirely certain. And I know that our development team is working to try and figure out, are there donors within our base who would be interested in funding specific advocacy work and specific, parts of the work that we're doing. But to my knowledge, we don't have a specific donor who funds advocacy work only at this moment. But it is something that we're trying to do as well.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. So I believe Court is going to answer one more question and then might leave everyone with another one. And if folks wanted to chat that and answers into that, we would welcome that. So Court, you're up.
Cool. Yeah, there was just one more question I wanted to dive into about how to make nutrition education culturally responsive. But yeah, I'd really pose folks to think of ways that they want to share on this webinar about how they're doing equity work, because again, I think we're really stronger together. And so if someone would be willing to chime in about how they're doing equity work, we'd love to really share best practices and do some co-learning. So I'll answer one more question, and then, this time is precious that we have to go. I'd really love to hear from someone who's willing to talk about some developments they have. Just our take on culturally responsive nutrition education. I work in the school pantry realm as well. We have 29 partner sites at K through 12 locations, and they're some of our most diverse clientele. We see a lot of newcomers coming to our sites, and so it's a really incredible opportunity to figure out how to do culturally responsive work. We have some incredible dollars that are coming from our city to put into this work to end child hunger, which is really exciting for a lot of folks that, they want to put their money first towards folks experiencing hunger that are under 18. So we get a lot of dollars, but often the demand is to do these workshops that don't necessarily land extremely well with the communities that we're serving, either because it's not the foods that they're used to at home, or it's not the language that they can actually understand. And so we're seeing, 75 plus languages at our school pantry sites, and we have to meet this sort of grant requirement to make sure that we're doing these nutrition-based classes. So I just really appreciate that question, because we're constantly trying to figure that out. What we're able to do this year is we were able to ask the city if we could experiment with more culturally responsive food demonstrations. And so really, how do we find folks that are already shopping our pantry, that know how to cook, that know how to stretch that dollar, that are doing it in foods and languages that taste like back home, and how can we empower those folks to spread pointers and tips to other clients on how to cook that food and how to do it in the way that's most nutritious. And so we finally lowered the threshold of education-based classes, and we're trying to pilot these new culturally responsive food demonstrations where we ask clients to take the same types of foods they would see in the pantry, and we ask them to put it together and to share with their fellow clients on how they stretch that dollar, how they make it nutritious, how they try to use as much as they can to feed as many people as they can. And it's really about, again, trusting that client-to-client communication and expertise is really valid. And also making sure there's a stipend for that, so that community leader is being asked to do something on top of what they're already doing, but they're really able to get like a gift card or some sort of incentive or reimbursement for their time, but to really, again, have that trust that's already there amongst clients be built throughout the Oregon Food Bank and ask that person to participate. So we're hoping to pilot that, but it's really hard. It needs to be in the right language. It needs to be done with the right person. And I think there's just something really priceless about having that right person doing that food demonstration, doing that nutrition ed class, who has come from that community, who speaks the language of that community, that knows how to stretch a dollar, that knows how to create the right recipes. That's just absolutely priceless, and it's important that we make sure that those folks are getting the resources they need to be in leadership in doing that work.
Great, thank you, Court. Appreciate that. Well, that is a wrap for us here. Thank you so much for attending, those of you who braved weather potentially to join us today, and extending generous gratitude to our generous presenters. Thank you so much to Court, Megan, Nicole, and Linda for taking the time to share their stories, their ideas, their expertise with us today. Equity is a journey, and we hope that you'll join us. I will send out a copy of the PowerPoint. There will be a link available to this recording in about a week. And if you could take a moment to visit the Survey Monkey I put into the chat box, which I will include in a follow-up email to give us your feedback, that would be greatly appreciated and will help us determine what the next webinar topic will be. So thank you. Please stay safe. And again, thank you so much to our presenters. It was a fabulous presentation. Take care, everyone.